Several hundred years ago, Europe operated like a giant, highly organized ant farm. Millions of people were farming, traders were pulling carts, and continuous streams of goods moved along a web of dirt roads connecting every major town. Tracing the wealth in this system reveals a specific, rigid pattern. The gold generated by the workers moved exclusively upward, leaving the sprawling farmlands and pooling inside the isolated, fortified castles of the ruling lords. This was the core of feudalism. As a peasant, you were legally bound to the land you farmed. You spent your life growing the crops that fed the continent, but the system ensured you remained at a subsistence level, earning almost nothing for your labor. The economic math was simple and brutal. Because the population was so high, there was an endless supply of replaceable workers. This massive surplus meant the economic value of an individual peasant was effectively zero. While the domestic workforce remained trapped, the ruling class used their hoarded wealth to expand. They commissioned massive fleets to navigate the globe, importing exotic spices, silk, and luxury goods to further enrich their estates. By the mid-1300s, the European economy was a perfectly rigged engine designed to keep the rich wealthy and the poor stationary. It was a closed loop, until an invisible variable entered the global supply chain. These maritime routes acted as high-speed corridors for cargo and a hidden population of black rats. The ships provided a rapid transit network across the sea, while the true biological threat lived deep within their fur, a microscopic flea carrying deadly bacteria. When the ships docked, the rats carried the bacteria into an environment perfectly suited for an outbreak. Medieval cities were defined by extreme density, narrow streets, and a complete lack of garbage management. The infection moved through these crowded neighborhoods with terrifying speed. It jumped from a rat to a single human, then branched out to their family and neighbors. Within days, the sickness spread through the urban grid like falling dominoes. This was the Black Death. The global trade networks built to generate wealth were now being used by a parasite to systematically dismantle the continent. Doctors at the time lacked any understanding of bacteria. They believed the disease was caused by miasma, poisonous smells in the air. To protect themselves from the poisonous air, they wore masks with long beaks stuffed with sweet-smelling flower petals. They hoped breathing through flowers would filter the air, but these defenses were useless against a flea-borne pathogen. Their medical understanding was completely detached from the biological reality of the plague. The resulting scale of death was staggering. In just a few years, roughly half of Europe's entire population was wiped out. As the population collapsed, the medieval economy stopped. Farms became overgrown with weeds, construction sites fell silent, and entire villages were completely empty. The plague achieved what no invading army could. It paralyzed the engine of feudalism by erasing the one thing that made it run: the people. In the aftermath, the surviving population looked out at a landscape physically intact but economically broken. There were millions of acres of fertile land, but no one left to harvest the crops. The surviving lords were in a state of panic. They held massive estates in gold, but with the workforce gone, they had no way to generate food. Their wealth was becoming worthless because there was no labor to back it up. For the first time, Europe faced a massive labor shortage. The supply of workers had dropped so low that those who survived were now incredibly rare. This scarcity inverted the law of supply and demand. The peasant class, which had been economically worthless just years before, was now the most valuable asset in the economy. Ordinary workers suddenly realized they held total leverage over the ruling class. The power dynamic that had defined the continent for centuries had flipped. These empowered workers began making unprecedented demands. They refused to work unless they received substantially higher wages, access to better food, and the right to own property. The legal ties that bound peasants to their lords were broken. Because every landowner was desperate for help, workers could leave their ancestral farms and move freely to whichever employer offered the highest pay. This rise in labor costs forced a massive shift in how society functioned. To stay profitable with fewer people, landowners began investing in labor-saving technologies like improved water mills and early printing presses. Because surviving workers were high-value assets, cities started funding medical research to protect their population, while the new surplus of wages allowed families to pay for education for the first time. The Black Death was a horrific tragedy that brought immeasurable suffering. But like a forest fire clearing out old, dead wood, it burned down a rigged and oppressive system, allowing a fairer and more technologically advanced world to grow from the ashes.